right, welcome back to the Spectra Creative channel and our multi-part series on the Mattycollector 2016 line, at least the full line that was planned out before I left Mattel. And I, being Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, I was the brand manager for Mattycollector and Masters of the Universe Classics and what became Masters of the Universe Chronicles, or at least what was planned to be that. And while there was still a 2016 line that the team that took over for me after I left did put out, there were a lot more SKUs planned. It was basically planned as just as big of a year as 14 and 15. And we're going to dive into that. So this video, part 2, is going to look at the non-monthly figures. We already did a video, part 1, on the monthly slots, January through December, for Masters of the Universe Chronicles, what it was going to be called. Or actually it was MOTUC Chronicles, excuse me, not using the full name, just the abbreviation. And this guy here that we're slowly scanning down, this 80s rocker dude, was going to be the subscription-only figure. This is Songster, who was the narrator of the Power Tour from the 80s. It was the live He-Man and She-Ra roller derby tour stage show, and he was the narrator. And he was kind of recast in Masters of the Universe Classics as like a troubadour or a, like a court singer, if you will. And this was a character, honestly, I was trying to get into the line forever because, one, he just looked so cool with the 80s hair and the rock and roll jumpsuit. We didn't really have any musicians in the line. We had an actor, Manny Faces, but there really weren't that many musicians, minus maybe Bo and his harp. So deliberately put into the MOTUC Classics mini comics as like a court storyteller who would entertain the children with tales, etc., with the idea that we could then set him up to be in the comic, or the line, that is. We also put him as a fan's choice slot when we did a fan choice vote. He didn't win, unfortunately, and I even contacted the actor who played him. But unfortunately, he wanted a lot of money to participate. I just wanted him to put on his social media feed, hey, vote for me. But unfortunately, that wasn't going to happen. So maybe a figure would have existed of him and looked kind of something like this fan custom. But hey, this would have been the subscription-only figure, which the new team wound up doing as Dispara took that slot when the new team took over. And like I said, at least we did get some toys in 2016, which is awesome. Still a victory. This isn't a video bashing the new team at all. It's just a look at what, could have been. And speaking of that, we're going to move on to our beasts. And the first beast, which is one you did get, was this guy, Night Stalker. So Night Stalker was the vintage robotic horse from the vintage robotic horse from the vintage line. That sounds like good English. And it was cool. It was awesome. It was a giant robotic horse. I remember a lot of people asking if we did this character, if it would be a robot or a beast. And obviously it's a beast. It's just a robotic beast. It's just like Battle Cat or Swiftwind. And there was a bio developed for Stroidor, especially because Stroidor had a vintage figure. But the new team went just without bios since it was easier, since there were not bios for everybody. And you could see he was a little bigger than the vintage figure, much like Classics. Came in an awesome giant window box package. I'm so glad that the new team, the team that took over, did move forward with Night Stalker, and make him happen. Boy, guy got robotic horses on the brain. And that is actually, that does kind of lead into the fact that the tool got to be a reuse tool that Super 7 later did to do Stroidor, the good version of the robotic horse. And man, the Forceman knocked it out of the park. He was just awesome. And the fact that he was also articulated, because the vintage figure did not have articulated legs, and this one did, as well as an amazing, amazing neck articulation. And of course, the debate will go on for decades: is Night Stalker Skeletor's horse, or does Night Stalker belong to Jitsu, or the whole He-Man Fisto thing with Stroidor, same kind of concept. But you know what? It doesn't matter. The point is that the robotic horses are awesome, and I am so glad that they got to be part of MOTUC Classics. I didn't have Night Stalker, but I had Stroidor as a kid, and man, did I love having this giant robotic horse. And the fact that the Classics version, now had all this articulation, wow. All right, next up in the Beast oversized assortment was going to be Hans Hammerholder, the kind of giant dwarf from the mini comics. So this was a brand new character that Axel and I created. And when I described him to Axel, who was the artist of the mini comics, I said, basically, I want you to take Gimli's head and put it on Ram Man's body. And that was going to give us like this gigantic dwarf. And that was kind of the whole idea, was, to do like a huge, instead of dwarfs being small, to make it huge, if you will. Kind of like, Itari, am I pronouncing his name right? That, Tyrion Lannister played in Infinity War. I know, I'm mixing up all stuff. But yeah, the whole idea of like a giant dwarf. And, Axel did some concept art of what he could look like and just knocked it out of the park. And very deliberately, he was going to use Ram Man's body under all of that. Like you can see that with the ribbed legs. And that was one, to save on tooling, because we tooled up this one-use Ram Man body. But two, using things like the ribbed legs, that was the whole idea, that so many MOTU figures in the vintage line had reused parts. You would see Man-E-Face's legs show up on characters like Roboto. So we very deliberately wanted to do that, where you saw these legs show up again in other figures. So, this is a fan custom of maybe what he would have looked like. And yeah, I think he would have been awesome. I wish the Horseman could have sculpted Hans Hammerholder because, giant dwarf with a hammer on Ram Man's body. All right, next up, the third slot in the quarterly Beast Oversized would have then been Stroidor. And I'm so glad that the Super 7 did do Stroidor because, Mattel took all the time to tool up Night Stalker. And it's like, if you're going to tool a fully tooled robotic horse, and when there's two robotic horses, why would you not release the other one? So I'm so glad that Super 7 did. I was actually a little surprised that when Mattel trimmed the line down to only two beasts, that they didn't just do Night Stalker and Stroidor, because they'd invested all this tooling in Night Stalker. But hey, we got them both in the end. It doesn't matter how we got them. The point is we got them, and they're awesome, and they're articulated, just like I said, with Night Stalker. And, by the way, the reason I went with Night Stalker first is you kind of always want to put out the less demanded version first. Because if you put out Stroidor first, some people, like the day of buyers, might have passed on Night Stalker. But by putting out Night Stalker first, you're pretty much guaranteed the more popular version, Stroidor, is then going to sell. It's kind of a thing you'll see throughout a lot of lines I worked on. It was always sort of putting out the less fan-demanded version first, and then getting to the one the fans really wanted, because it was the name of sales. That was my job at Mattel. And, Stroidor came with both masks, the vintage one, and what would have been kind of like a 2000X inspired one. And, again, you can do the whole thing. Does he belong to Fisto? Does he belong to He-Man? It doesn't matter. The point is we have a giant, fully articulated robotic horse. And, again, the Horseman just did an amazing job with the neck and the legs. The vintage figures, just had these non-articulated, pre-posed legs. And also, Stroidor, much like Night Stalker, had a bio. The model number, by the way, was his toy number, if you caught that in the real name. That was the vintage toy number. All right, wrapping up the Beast and Oversized slots, the quarterly slots, was Tuscador, a.k.a. Incisor, whose name got changed for the European market. And this was a giant warrior from New Adventures that had these huge giant elephant tusks that came out. And, we'd already done an elephant character in Snout Spout, but hey, why not? And again, the whole point was to also reuse the Ram Man buck. So essentially you were going to be getting two Ram Man type characters and two giant robotic horses. And even though Tuscador, or Incisor kind of has that whole, brushing teeth joke gag going on, and, his enemies are probably the cavity monsters from the Crest TV commercials in the 80s. I think that would be his arch enemy, right? If we ever got, that would have been funny if we made something like that, like a rock monster, and specifically made it a New Adventures bad guy. Anyway, I'm on a total tangent. The point is, we were going to do two oversized warriors and two oversized robotic horses, and that was going to balance out the year, where every other quarter you got one. So by the end of the year, and Tuscador wound up being the one that the new team did go with. So Hans Hammerholder got dropped. So they did Night Stalker and Tuscador, dropping Hans Hammerholder and Stroidor. But, hey. And again, he had a bio, because all New Adventures figures had bios, his real name noting as Incisor. And again, a good reuse of that investment on the Ram Man buck, which at the time was a one and done, but a fully tooled figure. So this was a way of really paying off the investment in that tooling. And I know the vintage figure wasn't as big as Ram Man, but I think, the Horsemen really loved envisioning him as a bigger character like this, and I'm glad they did, because he turned out really cool. And I am glad that the new team went with, Incisor / Tuscador. All right, next up is our holiday item. So in past years, we did some big items like Granomir here as kind of a fourth quarter giftable holiday item that was outside of the sub as an add-on. And in 2016, the holiday add-on item was going to be the New Adventures giant Sagitaur, who was kind of a double-chested horse-type character. Yeah, I know, it's New Adventures. What are you going to say? So, he had 4 arms, and he had like double chests, and stood twice as tall, and horse parts. Who knows what were the designers in the 80s thinking when they came up with this? But he's cool, and he's very, very New Adventures, and this would have been an oversized non-sub day of fourth quarter Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa gift type item. Much like the like Granomir, as I just mentioned. So, he would have been big. He would have been, he probably would have used some of the parts from Titus, I think was the idea. It would have just been like 2 Titus chests stacked on top of each other. Obviously would need some new tooling, especially because he would have to rotate into his sort of horsey mode where he puts his hands on the ground. All right, next up, as far as non-sub items, was going to be our 2016 San Diego Comic-Con item. Every year we did really cool items for Comic-Con to promote the line. And 2016, which fans will remember had no Comic-Con item, which again, the new team does what they needed to do, not bashing on them, just showing what could have been, was going to be Prince Randor and Prince Keldor as they fought in the Great Unrest. So we saw them in the mini-comic, and again, very deliberately put in the mini-comic because wanted to establish what they looked like. So this was before Keldor sort of, turned evil, and he and his brother were fighting side by side. Now, Randor had been shown in his sort of Great Unrest armor with that giant Galactus helmet, so we were able to kind of snatch that right from the 2000X series. And kind of the whole idea was this was your Obi-Wan and Anakin of Masters of the Universe Classics. So, before they were enemies, when Anakin becomes Darth Vader, before Keldor becomes Skeletor, they were brothers in arms, literally in this case, well, half-brothers, and they were, fighting side by side in the Great Unrest. And to me, this idea was just, it really appealed to me, the idea of doing like a good guy version of Skeletor, doing Skeletor not just when he was Keldor, but before he became evil, because he was evil as Keldor, before he became Skeletor. All right, next up we had Green Goddess, and you'll say, wait a minute, you already did Green Goddess, and that was kind of the point, because the first Green Goddess we did all the way back in the first year had some problems, namely that the sonic welder used to attach the parts caused the legs to crack. Same thing happened in DCU Classics Wave 6, but the welder was fixed, the setting was corrected, but not in time to prevent some of the Green Goddess legs from falling off. Had nothing to do with the clear plastic. It was not cheap plastic. It was the welder. It was the sonic welder that was not set right. So now that we had a new Teela from the Talon Fighter set, the idea was to dress her as the Green Goddess and basically offer a new version of Green Goddess that would not have legs fall off. And then she would have been a combined non-sub item for both New York Comic-Con, and for the first time ever, we were going to have a PowerCon figure. This was something we were trying to get to happen for a couple years, and it was, politics at Mattel, all sorts of stuff, but the idea was to get this to PowerCon. All right, next up we had our vehicle, which again, this one did make it to market, which was the Roton with Skelecon driver. The Roton was one of my favorite vehicles as a kid. I don't think I quite got the idea that it was supposed to fly. I always just thought it was like a buzzing vehicle, like with a buzzsaw on the ground. But in a lot of the art, it was a flyer and like a sort of a UFO kind of flying saucer thing that Skeletor rode around in. And it was the first bad guy vehicle. that we were able to get to. And for Classics, we kind of combined all the versions, including the model kit version, which also inspired the Fearless Foemen, or the Fighting Foemen figures from years ago. But we were able to include that little top piece, so it was kind of, the be-all Roton that had, all the different parts of a Roton that you could want. You could have the canopy, you could not have the canopy. Amazing, beautiful box art, amazing instructions on the back, the whole 9 yards. This came out great. I was actually surprised it made it to market. I thought, there's no way they're going to tool the Roton after I leave, and no one's fighting for it to happen. But they did, and that's awesome. As a driver, yeah, so he had the Skelecons, which were from the Lady Bird books. This was kind of Skeletor's Nameless Army. We had done Nameless Armies for the Snake Men and for, the Palace Guards for the good guys and the Horde Troopers for the Horde. So we really wanted to give Skeletor a nameless army, if you will. I know we also did the Filmation robots, but this was kind of his other nameless army. Plus, visually, they just looked so cool with these giant, buzzard beaks. And, again, much like Songster and Keldor as Prince Keldor and Prince Randor, put them in the mini-comics deliberately to try to set the stage. And you'll notice they had wings in the mini-comics. Now, this was very deliberate because the idea was there were going to be 2 holes in the back of the skeleton to plug wings into. So the version that came with the Roton was not going to have wings, but it would have the holes because they would have been tooled as part of the skeleton figure. Because we knew fans were going to want to army build this character because much like the Horde Troopers and the Palace Guards and the Snake Man Warriors, fans were going to want a lot of them. These are your Stormtroopers of, MOTUC universe. And much like the Horde Trooper was supposed to have a single-carded version that came day and date with General Sundar, who had extra heads for the Horde Trooper. This eventually did get released, but not day and date. It got released a year later. When you make a toy line, you've got all these kind of details, and the marketing manager leaves the company, and the new team takes over. Sometimes you're going to break some eggs. So basically the winged version, which was going to be on a single card and was supposed to come out day and date with the Roton, just never happened. So you just got him with the Roton. But the plan was to do a single card version with the wings. So that and the wings, that way you could plug them in or out. I had flying ones or ground troopers. All right, next up in our non-monthly items was our Chase figure. So this was something that management had asked for a few years ago, was to find a way to replicate the idea of the toy hunt, but do it online. This was specific directions from management, and that's why we came up with doing the red popsicle version of Hordak, the Spirit of Hordak version, and having him just show up randomly online, both as a surprise and a delight. So you got that feeling of the toy hunt online. Yes, some fans hated it, some loved it. Either way, the figure that we were going to do for 2016 for this slot was going to be AntiAttorney He-Man, who I was really trying to get into the line to pay homage to the German fans because, honestly, they were the second biggest fan base outside of the United States for MOTUC Classics, and I really wanted to do a figure as kind of a thank you gift for the German fan base. And AntiAttorney He-Man was one of the only original characters from the MOTUC audio tapes, or the radio series, that was huge in Germany in the 80s. Now, they did wind up making the figure. He was not done as a Chase figure, as he was originally planned, and I have to say, I think it was Brandon Sapinski who did the packaging, or, no, he was the designer, so I guess it would have been maybe Frank Varela. Either way, whoever did the packaging, maybe it was Jason Langston, I'm naming random people here, I don't know who did it, I wasn't at Mattel, but they did an amazing job. I love that they reversed all the colors like this. So whoever you are, whoever did the packaging at Mattel, it's probably Jason Langston, I'm thinking. I could be wrong, though. They did an amazing job, and the character has now kind of been established as a very legitimate character in MOTUC lore. And I think having him as a figure in Classics really did that. Other companies he's now kind of become a go-to variant of He-Man, whereas before he was very obscure and no one had ever heard of him. But now, thanks to the MOTUC Classics version that, again, luckily did get released, it wasn't in the Chase slot, but it did come out, and that's all that matters. All that matters is that it happened. It doesn't matter how it happened. And, it's now kind of legitimized this character, an all black skin, and by black skin, I don't mean African American, I mean black, alien black. This is not an African American character. This is a alien character, because no human being has charcoal black skin and red hair. So there was like even some pushback saying that the character might have some racist issues, but I was like, no, humans don't have black skin, like charcoal black. It's an alien. All right, Snake Mountain. So Snake Mountain was planned while I was there. It was going to be the 2016 playset. Obviously, it's happening, and it's happening with Super 7 because it got fully funded by you guys, the fans. So way to go for that. I'm not going to talk about it much because I was really only part of it for the planning and the sculpting phase, and then it got pushed over to Super 7, but I'm just glad, again, it's happening. It doesn't matter how it happened, the fact that it came out years later. Hey, 2016 was going to be a very robust year, and I will probably do a third part of this video series highlighting the add-on sub for the year, which was going to be what became the Club Grayskull line, or the Filmation series, which also had a slightly different lineup, as well as the proposed minis line for that year. But we'll get that into part 3. This has been part 2, the non-monthly slots for MOTUC Chronicles, or what was still released as Masters of the Universe Classics. Again, all that matters is the figures came out. The new team still came through and put out quite a lot of figures, not as many as were originally planned, but it was still an awesome year. If you liked the video, please give me a subscription and a thumbs up. Love to hear what you think. I don't have a chance to comment back to every comment, but I do read them all. So leave some comments, and I'll see you guys on the line.